The conference room felt like a tomb. All polished mahogany and stifling, conditioned air. I sat with my hands folded calmly in my lap. A portrait of serene composure that I did not feel. Across the massive table, my husband, Richard, shifted impatiently in his leather chair. A man eager to sever a 42-year bond as if it were a minor inconvenience. Beside him, his lawyer. Richard Sterling, a longtime friend from the country club, exuded an air of smug satisfaction. But my gaze kept drifting to the far end of the table. To my son, Will, his face a mask of sorrow and confusion. And beside him, her hand resting possessively on his thigh, was my daughter-in-law, Amber. Her expression was one of carefully crafted sympathy, but I could see the predatory gleam in her eyes. The triumph. A week before, she had slept with my husband. A week before we were to sign these papers that would strip me of my home and my history. I pretended to know nothing. Sterling slid a thick document across the table. As you'll see, Eleanor, he said, his tone dripping with condescension, we've drafted a settlement that is more than generous. I smiled. A small, quiet curve of my lips. I picked up the heavy, expensive pen he offered. They all watched, holding their breath, expecting tears, arguments, final, desperate plea. They expected me to break. They thought they had one. They didn't know that I had been planning for this moment for weeks. They didn't know the game had been rigged from the start by me. What I did next left everyone in shock. I signed my name, Eleanor Elizabeth Morrison, with a steady, unhurried hand. Then I slid the papers back across the table. I hope this gives you everything you're looking for, Richard, I said, my voice as smooth as silk. They thought the game was over. They had no idea it was just beginning. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of my dining room a few weeks earlier, casting dappled patterns on the good china I had laid out for lunch. Claire had called that morning, her voice unusually tight when she asked if we could talk. Just the two of us. Something about her tone made my stomach clench, but I pushed the feeling aside, attributing it to the general sense of unease that had settled over my house like a fine layer of dust. Claire was my daughter-in-law Amber's older sister. While we had always been cordial, our relationship was one of polite distance, maintained for the sake of family harmony. I smoothed my hands over the tablecloth, the same cream-colored linen I had used for family gatherings for 30 years. 64. I still took pride in maintaining traditions, in creating a welcoming home within the sprawling colonial walls that had sheltered 3 generations of my family. Lately, though, the house felt too quiet, its grand rooms echoing with my solitude. Richard, my husband of 42 years, had been distant for months. He always found excuses: a crisis at the firm, a late dinner with clients, a mountain of paperwork that kept him cloistered in his study until long after I had gone to bed. The scent of his familiar cologne had been replaced by something new, something sharper and unfamiliar that clung to his shirts. And Will, our 35-year-old son, was so wrapped up in his marriage to Amber that his visits had become perfunctory at best, brief check-ins that felt more like obligations than cherished moments. The doorbell chimed its familiar, gentle tune, pulling me from my thoughts. I opened the heavy oak door to find Claire standing on my front steps, clutching her purse like a shield. She looked pale, her usually perfect makeup slightly smudged around her green eyes, as if she'd been crying and had tried hastily to repair the damage. "Eleanor, thank you for seeing me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Of course, dear. Come in. Come in." I ushered her into the cool entryway, my heels clicking softly on the marble floor. I led her to the dining room, noting how her hands trembled slightly as she set down her purse. The room was bright with sunlight, the table a picture of civilized grace, but a chill seemed to follow her inside. "I made your favorite cucumber sandwiches," I said, my voice warmer than I felt. "And that lemon cake you complimented last Easter." She managed a weak smile but didn't touch the food I had so carefully arranged. Instead, she stared at her folded hands on the table, her knuckles white with tension. I poured her a glass of iced tea, the crystal pitcher sweating in the warm air. "Claire, what's wrong?" I asked gently, taking the seat opposite her. "You look like you've seen a ghost." She looked up then, and I saw something in her eyes that made my blood run cold. It was a cocktail of emotions I couldn't immediately decipher: pain, certainly, and guilt. But underneath it all, there was a desperate kind of love, a fierce protectiveness that seemed entirely out of place. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something," she began, her voice faltering, and I don't know how to say it without destroying everything. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs, but I kept my voice steady, a lifetime of practice in maintaining composure kicking in. "Whatever it is, we can work through it together. You know that." Claire let out a shaky breath, tears finally pooling in her eyes and spilling down her cheeks. "It's about Amber. And Richard." The world tilted slightly on its axis, the familiar patterns on the wallpaper seeming to swim before my eyes. But I forced myself to remain still, a statue carved from decades of quiet endurance. My hands, which had been resting on the table, I folded calmly in my lap. "What about them?" The words tumbled out of her in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for so long they had built up an unbearable pressure. "They're having an affair." I felt something inside me crack, a deep, internal fracture, like ice breaking on a frozen pond. The sound was deafening in the silence of my own mind, but my outward expression remained placid. My voice, when I finally found it, was steady. "Are you certain?" Claire nodded miserably, unable to meet my eyes. "I've known for weeks. I saw them. I saw them together at that little cafe downtown. The Gilded Spoon. The one near Richard's office. They were holding hands across the table. Kissing. Not a friendly peck on the cheek, Eleanor. They were kissing like lovers." The image she painted was so vivid, so vulgar, that I had to close my eyes for a moment. Richard. My Richard. In that cafe he always claimed was too trendy for his taste. With her. With Amber. The lemon cake on the table suddenly seemed sickeningly sweet. I confronted Amber about it. Claire continued, her voice thick with shame. I begged her to think about what she was doing. To think about Will. About you. She didn't even try to deny it. She laughed. Laughed. The word hung in the air between us, ugly and sharp. She said it wasn't any of my business. But Eleanor, the things she said about you. Her voice broke completely then, and she covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. A cold dread, sharper than the initial shock, crept through me. I had to know. I had to understand the full scope of the betrayal. "What things, Claire?" I asked, though a part of me, the part that still clung to the memory of 42 years of shared life, didn't want to know. She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "She said you were old and boring, that you were holding Richard back. She said he deserved to be happy, to have some excitement in his life." Each word was a fresh wound. She said once the divorce was final, she would make sure you got as little as possible. "She's been planning this, Eleanor. The whole thing." She said she only married Will to get close to the family, to the money. She's been working on Richard for months, flattering him, making him feel young again. The room spun around me, a dizzying vortex of betrayal and deceit. I gripped the edge of the heavy mahogany table, my knuckles turning as white as hers. 42 years of marriage. A son I had raised with every ounce of love and dedication I possessed. A daughter-in-law I had welcomed with open arms, hosting her bridal shower in this very room. All of it. Every shared holiday. Every family photograph on the mantle. Every memory woven into the fabric of this house was a lie. A meticulously crafted illusion crumbling to dust because of greed and a breathtaking lack of morality. My voice was a whisper when I finally spoke. "Why are you telling me this, Claire?" She reached across the table and her cool, trembling hand grasped mine. "Because it's wrong," she said with a sudden ferocity. "Because you have been nothing but kind to my sister, to our entire family, since the day she met Will. And you don't deserve this. Because Will, my God, Will doesn't deserve to be married to someone who is capable of this level of deception." She paused, wiping her eyes with her free hand. "And because I love my nephew, even though he's not my blood, I can't stand by and watch Amber destroy everything good in this family for her own selfish ambition." I stared at our joined hands, mine wrinkled and spotted with age, hers smooth and young. A strange and unexpected alliance forged in the crucible of betrayal. "Does Will know?" "No," she whispered. "And I don't know if I should tell him. It would destroy him. He adores her." I gently pulled my hand free and stood up, the movement slow and deliberate. I walked to the bay window that overlooked the rose garden Richard and I had planted together in our early years. The roses were in full bloom, their crimson and pale pink petals a vibrant splash of color against the deep green foliage. Everything looked so normal, so peaceful. But now I knew that underneath the beautiful surface, the roots were rotting. "What will you do?" Claire asked from behind me, her voice laced with anxiety. I turned back to face her, and in that short walk from the table to the window, something had shifted inside me. The initial, shattering shock was giving way to something cooler, harder, more calculating. I had spent my entire adult life taking care of others, smoothing over problems, being the family's anchor, the keeper of the peace. But this was not something that could be smoothed over. This was a declaration of war. "Nothing," I said calmly. Claire's eyes widened in disbelief. "Nothing? Eleanor, you can't just..." "I'm going to pretend I never heard this conversation," I interrupted, my voice devoid of the tremor I felt in my soul. "I'm going to smile and play the devoted wife and mother. And I'm going to let them think they're winning." "But, Eleanor," she stammered, confused. "Your marriage, Will, Claire, dear," I said, walking back to the table and sitting down. My hands were perfectly steady as I poured myself a cup of tea I didn't want. Some games require patience, and I have been patient for a very, very long time. I met her gaze, and she must have seen something new there, something that surprised her, because she sat back slightly in her chair. "Tell me, does Amber know you're here?" "No. She thinks I'm at a work conference in the city." "Good," I said, a sense of clarity cutting through the fog of my pain. "It needs to stay that way. Can you do that for me? Can you pretend you never told me?" Claire nodded slowly, her eyes searching my face. "Yes. But what about Will? What about the divorce they're so obviously planning?" I took a slow, deliberate sip of tea, letting the familiar ritual calm my racing thoughts. The delicate china cup felt solid and real in my hands. Some battles aren't won by charging in with guns blazing. "My dear," I said, setting the cup down with a soft click. "Sometimes, you have to let your enemies walk right into the trap you've set for them. You have to let them think they've already won." After Claire left, I sat alone in my sun-drenched dining room for a long time, staring at the untouched cake and sandwiches. The house felt different now, as if the very walls had shifted, realigning themselves around this new, terrible knowledge. Every family photo on the mantelpiece seemed to mock me. Richard and I on our wedding day, so young and full of foolish certainty. Will as a boy, smiling with a missing front tooth. A portrait from last Christmas. All four of us, with Amber's arm wrapped possessively around Will, her other hand resting lightly on Richard's shoulder as they all smiled for the camera. Perfectly composed lie. When Richard came home that evening, I was in the kitchen preparing his favorite dinner. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the same meal I had made almost every Thursday for 40 years. The scent of rosemary and thyme filled the air. A homey, comforting aroma that was now a part of the charade. "Smells good," he said. His voice distracted as he loosened his tie. He didn't meet my eyes, instead focusing on the mail I'd left on the granite countertop. "Long day at the office?" I asked, my tone perfectly pleasant, as if I didn't know he'd probably spent his lunch hour with my daughter-in-law, his hands holding hers instead of a legal brief. "The usual," he grunted, already heading upstairs to change. I continued setting the table, my movements automatic and precise. The heavy silverware, the starched linen napkins, the water glasses polished to a gleam. All the small rituals of a life I now realized was built on a foundation of sand. When he returned, we ate in relative silence, the chasm between us wider than the length of the dining table. The conversation was limited to mundane topics: the weather, a leaking faucet in the guest bathroom, the stock market. But I watched him now. I watched him with new eyes, noting things I had subconsciously registered but consciously ignored for months. The way he checked his phone, which he'd placed face down beside his plate. The new, expensive-looking watch on his wrist that I hadn't bought him. The simple, damning fact that he no longer looked at me when he spoke. 42 years. And I was just now seeing my husband clearly. That night, as he lay beside me in our king-sized bed, his breathing deep and even in sleep, I stared at the dark ceiling and made a decision. They wanted to play games. They thought they were so clever. The seasoned businessman and the ambitious young woman, united in their arrogance and their contempt for the old, boring woman who stood in their way. Fine. Let them play. But they had no idea who they were playing against. They were playing against the woman who had built this family, who knew every secret held within these walls, who had inherited not just a house, but a legacy. A legacy with protections they couldn't possibly imagine. They had started the game, but I would be the one to finish it. Living with the knowledge of betrayal was like walking on broken glass. Every smile I forced, every pleasant conversation I maintained, cut deeper into my soul. But I persisted, playing my role as the unsuspecting wife and mother with an actress's dedication, while carefully observing the elaborate deception unfolding in my own home. I became a student of their lies, cataloging every sidelong glance, every hushed phone call, every flimsy excuse. My grief was a cold, hard stone in my chest, but I learned to build my strategy around it. 3 days after Claire's revelation, Amber arrived for our usual Sunday dinner. She swept into my kitchen, a whirlwind of youthful energy and expensive fabric, wearing a new designer dress that was a shade too bold for a casual family meal. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her smile as bright and false as costume jewelry. "Eleanor, you look wonderful," she gushed, embracing me with a theatrical warmth that made my skin crawl. The expensive perfume that clung to her skin was cloying, and with a sickening jolt, I recognized it. It was the same unfamiliar scent I detected on Richard's shirts lately. "I love what you've done with the flowers on the table. Are those from the garden?" I returned her hug, my hands patting her back in a gesture that looked motherly but felt like I was assessing an adversary. "Thank you, dear. Yet, the David Austins are particularly lovely this year. We should be here shortly. Would you like some wine while we wait?" "That would be lovely," she said, settling herself at the kitchen island with a practiced elegance, crossing her long legs. She watched me as I retrieved a bottle of Chardonnay from the wine fridge. "Actually," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone, "I was hoping we could have a little chat. Just us girls." My hands remained steady as I worked the corkscrew, though my heart began to race. This was it. The next move in her carefully orchestrated game. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Amber took a delicate sip of the wine I poured for her and leaned forward, her expression a perfect mask of concern. I'm worried about you, Eleanor. About you and Richard. The audacity of it nearly took my breath away. Here she was, the architect of my marriage's destruction, pretending to be my confidant, my ally. It was a performance worthy of an award. I had to admire her nerve, even as it filled me with a cold fury. Oh? I said, my voice carefully neutral. Why would you be worried? Well, she began, sighing dramatically. You two just seem so distant lately. At family gatherings, there's this tension. It's like you're in the same room, but you're miles apart. She placed her manicured hand over mine in a gesture of false sympathy. Her skin was cool to the touch. Marriage can be so challenging after so many years. The spark, it just fades sometimes. It's no one's fault. I nodded thoughtfully, as if I were truly considering her words. You know, you might be right. We have been going through a rough patch. Amber's eyes lit up with a flash of satisfaction that she tried, and failed, to disguise as concern. Have you considered counseling? Or, maybe, she trailed off, as if hesitant to speak her mind. Maybe it's time to think about what would make you both happier in the long run. I decided to help her along. You think we should get a divorce? I asked, my voice flat, letting her believe she was leading me to this conclusion. Oh, I'm not saying that. She backtracked quickly, the perfect picture of someone who didn't want to overstep. But I could see the excitement bubbling just beneath her concerned facade. I just think life is too short to stay in a marriage that isn't fulfilling. You deserve to be happy, Eleanor. Truly happy. You deserve someone who appreciates you for the wonderful woman you are. The irony was suffocating. The poisonous cloud. The woman who was sleeping with my husband was telling me I deserved better. That's very thoughtful of you to say, Amber. I just care about this family so much. She continued, her voice taking on a practiced sincerity that was both impressive and repulsive. Will would want both of his parents to be happy, even if that means part. And honestly, she added, giving my hand a little squeeze, you're still such an attractive woman. I'm sure there are plenty of distinguished men out there who would be thrilled to have someone like you. She was already casting me in my new role, the lonely but dignified divorcee, safely tucked away in a condo somewhere, while she took my place. I smiled and nodded, playing the part of the naive, aging wife being gently guided toward the exit by her caring daughter-in-law. Inside, I was a court reporter, cataloging every word, every gesture, every calculated manipulation for a future proceeding no one else knew was coming. When Will arrived, the dynamic shifted immediately. Amber transformed into the devoted wife, a paragon of marital bliss. She hung on his every word, touched his arm constantly, and laughed at his jokes with an exaggerated delight that I now saw was completely hollow. Will, bless his trusting heart, basked in her attention, oblivious to the fact that his wife's eyes kept drifting to the doorway, waiting for his father's car to pull into the driveway. Richard entered the dining room 20 minutes late, claiming he'd been detained at the office on a Saturday. Amber's cheeks flushed a pretty pink when he kissed my cheek in greeting, and I watched, my stomach clenching, as their eyes met for just a moment too long across the table. It was a silent, illicit conversation that I was now fluent in. Sorry I'm late, Richard said, taking his usual seat at the head of the table. Crisis with the Matthews account. No problem at all, Dad, Will replied easily. We were just talking about the vacation Amber and I are planning for next month. Oh, that's right, Richard said, his attention suddenly focused. His gaze shifted to Amber. Where are you thinking of going? We haven't decided yet, Amber said, her voice breathier than usual. Maybe somewhere warm, tropical, place where we can just escape from everything. The way she looked at Richard when she said the word escape made my stomach turn. It was an invitation. Promise. But I continued cutting my roast beef with steady hands, maintaining my pleasant, matronly expression. That sounds wonderful, I said, my voice bright. You young people work so hard. You deserve a break. After dinner, while Will and I cleared the dishes, a familiar Sunday ritual, Amber and Richard remained at the table. Their heads were close together, their conversation low and intimate. I strained to catch fragments of their words as I rinsed plates at the sink, the running water providing cover for my eavesdropping. Can't keep doing this. Amber's voice, urgent and pleading. Not much longer. Richard's reply, low and reassuring. She suspects something. Amber again, a note of worry in her voice. She doesn't know anything, Richard said, his tone dismissive. She's too wrapped up in her garden and her charities to notice. They were wrong. I knew everything. But I continued loading the dishwasher, humming softly to myself as if I didn't have a care in the world. I was the ghost in my own home, unseen, underestimated, and that was my greatest advantage. The following week, I made an appointment, not with the family attorney Richard and I had used for years, a man who played golf with Richard every other weekend. I made an appointment with a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Chan, whose firm specialized in complex divorce and estate cases. Her office was in a sleek, anonymous glass tower in Stamford, far from our usual Greenwich haunts, ensuring I wouldn't be seen by anyone who might report back to Richard. Patricia was younger than me, probably in her late 40s, with intelligent, dark eyes and an air of quiet competence that immediately put me at ease. She listened without interruption as I laid out the situation, my voice calm and factual, omitting the raw emotion that churned just beneath the surface. Mrs. Morrison, she said after I'd finished, her fingers steepled under her chin. I have to ask, why haven't you confronted your husband directly about the affair? I clasped my hands in my lap, the worn gold of my wedding band feeling heavy and foreign. Because this isn't just about an affair. Chen, I said, choosing my words with care. This is about a calculated effort to dispossess me. My husband and my daughter-in-law believe I am a naive, sentimental old woman who will dissolve into tears and accept whatever crumbs they deign to throw my way. I want to understand exactly what I'm dealing with legally before I make any moves. This house, our assets, our family legacy. I need to know precisely where I stand. Patricia nodded, a flicker of approval in her eyes. A smart approach. Most people let emotion drive their decisions. Let's start with the basics. How are your assets currently titled? For the next hour, we went through everything. The investment accounts accumulated over decades of my careful budgeting and Richard's earnings. The family business that Richard had inherited from his father. And most importantly, the house. The sprawling Greenwich colonial. Purchased 40 years ago not with Richard's money, but with the inheritance I received from my family's estate. I had brought a copy of the deed, along with a thick, leather-bound document I had retrieved from a safe deposit box that morning. It was the original trust established by my grandfather, a formidable man who had made his fortune in shipping and had a deep-seated mistrust of smooth-talking suitors. This is interesting, Patricia said, her sharp eyes scanning the yellowed pages of the trust documents. She adjusted her glasses. Your grandfather was quite forward-thinking for his era. He was a man who believed in protecting his own. I said simply. Indeed. She pointed to a specific paragraph. This trust has some very specific, ironclad provisions regarding inheritance and, more pointedly, divorce. What kind of provisions? I asked, my pulse quickening. Patricia read from the document, her voice clear and precise. In the event that a marriage to a direct bloodline beneficiary of this trust is dissolved, The disposition of the primary residence located at 14 Willow Creek Lane, Greenwich, Connecticut, shall be determined as follows. She looked up at me over her glasses. It says the house can never be sold or transferred to anyone outside your direct bloodline, as long as a bloodline heir is living. Even in a divorce, your husband would have no legal claim to the property itself. It belongs to the trust, and you are its lifetime beneficiary. A wave of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy washed over me. My grandfather, dead for 50 years, was reaching through time to protect me. But there's more, Patricia said, a slight smile touching her lips for the first time. And this part is quite unusual. It's an infidelity clause. An infidelity clause? Yes. A moral turpitude provision, as he calls it here. She read again. In the event that said marriage is dissolved due to proven adultery on the part of the non-beneficiary spouse, the offending party shall forfeit any and all claim to assets derived from, connected to, or maintained by said trust. She took off her glasses and looked at me directly. Mrs. Morrison, what this means is that if you can prove your husband's affair, you would retain not just the house, but several other key investments and properties that were purchased with funds commingled with trust assets over the years. Properties that your husband currently believes he co-owns and is entitled to half of. I sat back in the plush leather chair, feeling something like hope stir in my chest for the first time in weeks. Cold, clear, beautiful hope. And he has no idea about these provisions? Patricia shook her head. From what you've told me, it sounds like he and his legal counsel are operating under the standard assumption of equitable distribution in a long-term marriage. They have no idea that your grandfather essentially built a fortress around your inheritance. I left Patricia's office feeling lighter than I had in a month. The broken glass I had been walking on suddenly felt like a solid path forward. Richard and Amber thought they were playing chess, but they didn't even know all the pieces on the board. They were playing checkers, while I was preparing for a checkmate they would never see coming. That evening, I watched as Richard struggled to maintain his facade of the devoted husband. He complimented my cooking with forced enthusiasm, asked about my day with manufactured interest, and kissed my forehead goodnight with lips that had been kissing another woman. But I could see the cracks in his performance now. The guilt was eating at him, even as his arrogance convinced him he was getting away with it. He was a man caught in a trap of his own making, and he didn't even know it yet. Richard, I said as we prepared for bed, my voice soft. I was brushing my hair at my vanity, watching his reflection in the mirror. He stiffened, his back to me as he hung up his shirt in the closet. Yes? I've been thinking, I said, putting down my brush. I've been thinking about what Amber said the other day. About our marriage. He turned then, and I saw a flash of something in his eyes. Relief? Excitement? He was trying to hide it, but I saw it. What about it? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Maybe she's right, I said with a sigh, letting my shoulders slump in a show of weary resignation. Maybe we're just done. Maybe it's time we both considered our options, pursued our own happiness, wherever that might lead. Richard nodded slowly, his expression a careful study in solemnity, but he couldn't keep a triumphant spark from his eyes. He thought I was surrendering. He thought his plan was working perfectly. If that's what you really want, Eleanor, he said, his voice full of false sympathy, I just want you to be happy. Liar. But I smiled back at him. That gentle smile that completed my performance as the defeated wife. I want us both to be happy, Richard. As I lay in bed that night, listening to Richard's satisfied, even breathing beside me, I thought about Amber's triumphant smile, about the expensive dress and perfume she wore to my home. I thought about the way she touched my son's shoulder while planning her escape with his father. They thought they were so clever. They thought they'd already won. They had no idea the game was just beginning. and I was going to enjoy every single move. The law offices of Sterling and Associates occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown high-rise in Stamford, a space designed to intimidate with its expanses of marble, mahogany, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city. I sat in the reception area, my hands folded calmly in my lap, exuding a tranquility that was entirely manufactured. Richard paced near the windows, a lion in a cage of his own making. He checked his phone every few seconds, his jaw tight with an anxious energy he couldn't quite conceal. He'd been on edge all morning, snapping at me over breakfast and muttering under his breath about getting this over with. He wanted his freedom, and he was agitated that the final step was taking so long. Amber had, insisted on coming. Her stated reason was to support Will during this difficult time for the family, a sentiment so outrageously false it was almost comical. She sat beside my son now on a low leather sofa, her hand resting possessively on his thigh while she whispered what I could only assume were reassurances in his ear. She was the picture of a supportive daughter-in-law, her face a mask of gentle concern. But I saw the nervous tapping of her foot, the way her eyes darted towards Richard, the electric anticipation she could barely contain. Today was her coronation day. Will looked devastated. His face was pale and drawn, his shoulders slumped. He still believed this divorce was a mutual, albeit sad, decision, an amicable end to a marriage that had simply run its course. He had been quiet and withdrawn for weeks, treating me with a gentle, pitying kindness that broke my heart. If only he knew the truth. If only he knew that the woman whispering comfort to him was a viper we had welcomed into our home. A tall, silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored suit approached us. His smile was smooth and practiced. Eleanor. Richard. I'm Richard Sterling. Thank you for coming in today. Richard had chosen Sterling himself, claiming the man was the best divorce attorney in the state. What Richard had conveniently failed to mention was that Sterling was also his longtime friend and golfing partner, a detail I had discovered during my own quiet research into the man's background. This wasn't a mediation. It was an ambush. We were led into a conference room dominated by a massive table that could have seated 20. The air was thick with the scent of leather and lemon polish. Sterling took his seat at the head, spreading a thick stack of documents across the polished surface with the practiced efficiency of a master illusionist preparing his props. Richard sat to his right, a loyal subordinate. I took the chair directly across from them, placing my simple leather handbag on the floor beside me. Will and Amber positioned themselves at the far end of the table, close enough to observe but removed from the main proceedings, like spectators at a public execution. Before we begin, Sterling said, his voice carrying the smooth authority of someone accustomed to controlling rooms full of anxious people, I want to ensure everyone understands that this is intended to be an amicable dissolution. Both parties have expressed a desire to handle this matter with dignity and fairness. He glanced at me, a flicker of challenge in his eyes. I nodded graciously, my expression soft. Of course. That's what we both want, isn't it, Richard? Richard shot me a quick, uncertain glance, probably surprised by my cooperative tone. He had been expecting a battle. He had braced himself for resistance, arguments, tears. Instead, I had been nothing but reasonable, even placid, since agreeing to the divorce, and my compliance had clearly unsettled him. It wasn't part of their script. Excellent. Sterling continued, his confidence returning. Now, let's review the proposed settlement. He slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the table toward me. As you'll see, we've attempted to divide the marital assets equitably, taking into consideration the length of the marriage and both parties' contributions over the years. I opened the folder and began to read, keeping my expression carefully neutral, even as the words on the page made my blood boil with a cold, silent rage. According to Sterling's magnanimous proposal, I would receive the small downtown condo we'd purchased as an investment property 15 years ago, a sterile, two-bedroom apartment with no character and no garden. I would also receive half of our joint savings account, a figure that seemed suspiciously low, and a modest monthly alimony payment that would barely cover the condo's maintenance fees. Richard, on the other hand, would retain everything else. The family's home. The business he had inherited, but which I had helped sustain through years of hosting clients and supporting his career. The vacation property in Nantucket. The majority of our extensive investment portfolio. It wasn't an equitable division. It was a hostile takeover. This seems rather one-sided, I said mildly, not looking up from the documents. I turned a page slowly, as if studying the fine print with great care. Sterling cleared his throat, a sound of practiced condescension. I understand your concern, Eleanor, but we have to consider the reality of the situation. Richard has been the primary breadwinner throughout the marriage, and the business, Morrison Capital, requires continuity of leadership to maintain its value. The house, he continued, his tone becoming even more patronizing, has significant maintenance costs and property taxes that would be, well, a significant burden for you to manage on a reduced income. The translation was clear. They thought I was too old, too dependent, too financially illiterate to fight for what was rightfully mine. They were patting me on the head as they pushed me out the door. Additionally, Sterling went on, pressing his advantage, there are some complications regarding the house specifically. Our preliminary title search indicates there may be some irregularities with the original deed and the trust documentation from your grandfather. It's quite archaic and convoluted. He waved a dismissive hand. Until those issues are properly resolved, which could take years and significant legal fees, it would be prudent for everyone to leave the property in Richard's name to avoid any protracted legal complications down the road. I almost laughed. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. They were trying to steal my family's home using fabricated legal complications as a smokescreen. The fortress my grandfather had built around me, they were describing as a crumbling ruin. I could see Amber out of the corner of my eye, sitting a little straighter in her chair, a flicker of a smile on her lips. She was probably already mentally redecorating the master bedroom, choosing paint swatches and new furniture. I see, I said quietly. And these irregularities, when do you expect them to be resolved? Sterling waved his hand dismissively again, as if shooing away a fly. Oh, these things can take years to sort out. Generational property transfers, obscure trust modifications. It's quite the legal quagmire. Really, it's better for everyone if we keep things simple and clean. Richard leaned forward, his voice taking on the patient, indulgent tone he used to use when explaining complex business deals to me over the dinner table. Eleanor, I know this isn't easy, but Sterling knows what he's talking about. This way, you won't have to worry about the property taxes, the maintenance, all those headaches. The condo will be perfect for you. It's brand new, secure, much more manageable. Manageable. As if I were a child who needed to be protected from adult responsibilities. As if I hadn't managed that household, its finances, and its demanding social calendar for over 4 decades. I slowly lifted my gaze from the papers and looked around the table, taking in each face. Sterling, smug and satisfied with his clever manipulation of legal language. Richard, trying to look sympathetic while barely containing his excitement at getting everything he wanted. A free man with a fortune and a young lover. Amber, her eyes bright with triumph as she imagined herself as the new mistress of 14 Willow Creek Lane. And Will, my sweet boy, looking deeply uncomfortable but trusting that his parents, the two people he loved most in the world, were handling things as fairly as they could. Well, I said, closing the folder with a soft, final snap. I suppose you've thought of everything. Sterling smiled. A predator who thinks the prey has finally surrendered. We've tried to be thorough. Yes. Thor. He added. A final flourish of false magnanimity. You are welcome to have your own attorney review the documents, but I think you'll find everything is quite standard for a case like this. Case like this. A devoted wife of 42 years being unceremoniously discarded, so her husband could start a new life with their son's wife. That won't be necessary, I said, my voice clear and firm. I reached for the pen Sterling had so helpfully offered earlier. Where do I sign? The room went silent. The air crackled with surprise. Even Amber looked taken aback by my immediate capitulation. She had been prepared for a fight, for a scene. My quiet acceptance was an anticlimax. Mom? Will's voice was uncertain, laced with concern. Are you sure? Maybe you should take some time to think about it. I turned my full attention to my son, this good and honorable man who still believed in fairness and honesty because I had raised him to. I gave him a sad, loving smile. Sweetheart, sometimes in life, you have to know when to fight and when to accept reality. Your father and I have had a good run, but it's time for both of us to start new chapters. Richard was frowning now, clearly puzzled by my easy surrender. He had prepared arguments and justifications for why he deserved everything. He had rehearsed speeches about his contributions and my lack of them. My compliance was making him nervous. It was too easy. The signature goes here. Eleanor, Sterling said quickly, recovering his composure and pointing to a line at the bottom of the final page. And here. And an initial here. I signed my name with steady, deliberate strokes. Each letter was precisely formed, the elegant cursive I had been taught as a girl. Eleanor Elizabeth Morrison. The same signature I had used on our marriage certificate 42 years ago, back when I was a naive girl who believed in the words forever and always. There, I said, setting down the pen and looking directly at Richard. I held his gaze, letting him see the quiet dignity I had summoned. I hope this gives you everything you're looking for. Something flickered in his eyes, then guilt. Maybe. Or a belated, fleeting recognition of what he was destroying. But the moment passed as quickly as it came, replaced by the selfish satisfaction of a man who thought he had gotten away with the ultimate betrayal. He had his fortune. He had his freedom. And soon, he would have his mistress. Amber could barely contain herself. She reached over and squeezed Will's hand, her voice breathy with a nauseating mixture of excitement and fake solemnity. I'm so proud of how maturely you're both handling this. It takes real strength to put the family first. Family first. The woman who was sleeping with her father-in-law was lecturing me about putting the family first. The hypocrisy was so profound. It was almost sublime. Thank you, dear, I said warmly, meeting her triumphant gaze. That means so much. Coming from you. As we prepared to leave, Sterling gathered the signed documents with obvious satisfaction. I'll file these with the court first thing tomorrow. The divorce should be finalized within 60 days. It's all very straightforward from here. 60 days. 60 days until Richard was free to marry his son's wife. 60 days until Amber thought she would be moving her designer clothes into my walk-in closet. 60 days until they discovered that some games have rules the players don't even know exist. 60 days until my grandfather's foresight and my own patience would bring their world crashing down around them. Outside the building, in the bright, unforgiving sunlight, Will hugged me tightly. His body was stiff with unshed tears. Mom, are you okay? You seem so calm about all this. I patted his cheek, my heart aching for his pain, his ignorance. This boy who looked so much like his father had at that age. Back when Richard still had a soul. I'm fine. Sweetheart. Everything is going to work out exactly as it should. Amber appeared beside us, her arm sliding around Will's waist with practiced possessiveness. She beamed at me. Your mother is an incredibly strong woman. Baby. She's going to be so much happier now. A fresh start. I'm sure I will be. I agreed, meeting her triumphant gaze with a serene smile of my own. I'm sure we all will be. As they walked away toward their car, I could hear Amber's excited chatter drifting back to me. She was talking about helping me pack, about finding me a nice retirement community where I could make friends my own age, about how much simpler life would be for everyone now. I stood there for a long moment in the shadow of the high-rise, watching my husband and my daughter-in-law celebrate their victory. I felt a deep, cold satisfaction settle in my chest, a feeling as solid and unyielding as granite. They thought they'd won. They thought they had outsmarted the naive old woman who had spent 42 years taking care of everyone but herself. They had no idea that in exactly 60 days, when their divorce became final and they tried to claim their prizes, they would discover that some property belongs not to husbands or wives, but to bloodlines that stretch back generations. They would discover that the fortress was not, in fact, a ruin. I walked to my car with steady steps, my mind already clear and focused. I pulled my phone from my handbag, my fingers scrolling through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for, Patricia Chan. There were preparations to complete, documentation to gather, and a few more moves to make in this chess game they didn't even know they were losing. The real show was about to begin. The 2 weeks that followed the meeting at Sterling's office were a masterclass in deception. I moved through my days in a state of surreal calm, a placid lake whose surface betrayed none of the turbulent currents swirling beneath. I began packing boxes, a slow and methodical process that served as the perfect cover for my real work. I labeled them with a black marker: kitchen linens, sentimental items, summer wardrobe, all for show. In reality, the most important items I was gathering were not porcelain teacups or photo albums, but financial statements, old letters, and property deeds that I was carefully organizing for Patricia Chan. Richard and Amber were drunk on their victory. They treated me with a cloying, condescending kindness that was almost more insulting than open hostility. Richard would pat my shoulder and say things like, "You're being so brave about all this, Eleanor," as if I were a child recovering from a scraped knee. Amber would call me daily, her voice dripping with false concern, offering to help me sort through all my old things and suggesting interior designers for my new, much more manageable condo. She was already measuring the drapes in my house with her eyes. Each phone call, each patronizing comment, was another drop of fuel on the fire of my resolve. I let them believe they were in control. I played the part of the slightly befuddled, heartbroken wife to perfection. I would forget where I'd packed things. I would sigh wistfully while looking at old family photos. I would ask Richard simple questions about finances, reinforcing his belief that I was utterly incapable of managing my own affairs. They saw what they wanted to see: a woman defeated, resigned to her diminished future. Meanwhile, my nightly phone calls with Patricia were the complete opposite. They were sharp, strategic, and focused. The commingling of funds is key, Eleanor, she had explained one evening, her voice a crisp counterpoint to the chirping crickets outside my window. Richard used dividends from the trust to fund a significant portion of his initial investment in Morrison Capital. He used trust funds to pay for the Nantucket property's down payment. He's been treating the trust like a personal piggy bank for decades, all while believing he had a right to it. According to your grandfather's infidelity clause, that all reverts to you. So, not just the house, I clarified, looking at the portrait of my stern-faced grandfather that hung in the study. Not just the house, Patricia confirmed. We're talking about a controlling interest in his business and the vacation home. The man is about to find out he's been living in a house of cards. And you, my dear, are the one holding the match. I was tending to my rose garden, snipping away deadheads with a precise and satisfying snick of my shears, when I heard the sound of tires crunching on the gravel of my driveway. It was Will's car, a practical and unassuming sedan, So different from his father's flashy Mercedes. But something was wrong. Instead of his usual cheerful wave as he got out, he just sat there behind the wheel for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. His silhouette was rigid with tension. When he finally emerged from the car, I could see that my son was a broken man. His usually pristine appearance was disheveled. His shirt was wrinkled, his dark hair uncombed. But it was his eyes that truly broke my heart. They held the hollow, devastated look of someone whose world had just been shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. "Will." I set down my gardening shears and my basket of wilting blooms and hurried toward him, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and grim vindication. "Sweetheart. What's wrong? What's happened?" He looked at me for a moment, his mouth opening and closing as if he couldn't find the words. He seemed to be looking right through me. Then his face crumpled, and he collapsed onto the bluestone steps of my front porch like a marionette whose strings had been cut. He buried his face in his hands, and his shoulders began to shake with deep, ragged sobs. "She's been lying to me," he whispered, his voice raw with a pain so profound it was almost physical. "The whole time. All of it. A lie." I sat down beside him on the cool stone, the scent of freshly cut grass and roses filling the air around us, a stark contrast to the ugliness of the moment. I didn't trust myself to speak. Part of me, the mother in me, wanted to wrap my arms around him and tell him everything would be okay. Another, colder part of me wanted to demand details, to finally have the concrete confirmation of what I'd known for weeks. Instead, I waited, giving him the space to find his own way to the truth at his own pace. I found text messages," he finally choked out, staring at his own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. "On her iPad. It was synced to her phone. Hundreds of them. Between Amber and Dad." He said the word Dad as if it tasted like poison. They've been planning this whole thing for months. For months, Mom." My own heart ached for him, for the brutal way his innocence had been stripped away. But I forced my voice to remain calm, to be the anchor he so desperately needed. "Planning what? Exactly, Will?" He let out a bitter, strangled laugh that sounded nothing like my gentle, good-natured son. "Everything. The divorce. The affair. They thought they were so clever. Waiting until after you signed the papers to run off together." Amber was bragging. She was bragging to a friend in one of the texts about how easy it was to manipulate both of you. She called you the weeping widow and me. She called me the golden goose. The words hit me like physical blows, even though I'd known the substance of the betrayal for weeks. Hearing it in their own crude, cruel language, repeated by my heartbroken son, made it real and visceral in a way that all my observations and suspicions hadn't. "How did you find out?" I asked quietly, my hand hovering over his back, wanting to offer comfort but not knowing if he could bear to be touched. "Claire," he said, his voice thick with a mixture of gratitude and grief. "Claire called me this morning. She was crying. She said she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. She couldn't watch this happen. She told me where to look, what to search for." I thought she was crazy at first. I defended them. I defended Amber. But then, I checked her iPad while she was in the shower, and it was all there. Every lie. Every single word. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, shaking his head in disbelief. I could imagine what those messages contained. The illicit excitement, the meticulous planning, the cruel laughter at the expense of the two people they were so callously betraying. My poor, trusting son, reduced to a golden goose in the eyes of the woman he loved. "Claire has been trying to warn people for weeks," Will continued, his voice gaining a harder edge. "She said she tried to talk to Amber, begged her to stop this before it went too far. But Amber just laughed at her. She told Claire that she'd worked too hard to get close to our family's money to give up now. Money. Of course. In the end, it always came back to money. Not love. Not genuine connection. Just a cold, ruthless calculation of assets and inheritance. Amber hadn't fallen in love with my husband. She had formed a business partnership with him. Where is Amber now? I asked, my voice still quiet. I confronted her this morning. I showed her the messages. I put the iPad right in front of her. Will wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. A new, steely anger beginning to replace the devastation. She didn't even try to deny it. Mom. She didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She just shrugged and said I was naive if I thought she'd ever actually loved me. She said Dad could give her the life she deserved. A life I never could. The casual cruelty of it, the sheer contempt she held for him, took my breath away. To dismiss years of marriage, to mock the love of a good man who had done nothing but cherish her, it was a level of sociopathy that was truly chilling. I threw her out, Will said, his voice gaining strength with every word. I told her she had 1 hour to pack her things and get out of our house. And she laughed at me again. She said it didn't matter because soon she'd be living somewhere much nicer anyway. Somewhere much nicer. My family home. The home she believed would soon be hers. A prize for her treachery. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, I said, finally allowing myself to place a comforting hand on his shoulder. His muscles were bunched in tight knots of tension. You didn't deserve any of this. Will looked up at me then. His eyes red-rimmed but clear, searching my face. How are you so calm about this? How are you just packing boxes and planning to move? Dad betrayed you, too. He threw away 42 years of marriage for her. I studied my son's face. This man I had raised to believe in goodness and loyalty. And I made a decision. He was no longer the innocent, trusting boy I needed to protect from the truth. He had been forced into this ugly reality, and he deserved to know that he wasn't alone in it. He deserved to know that someone else was fighting for what was right. Will, I said, my voice low and serious. There's something I need to tell you. About the divorce. About what really happened in that lawyer's office. Over the next hour, sitting there on the sun-warmed steps of the house that was the epicenter of this earthquake, I told him everything. I told him about Claire's initial warning, about my weeks of careful observation and feigned ignorance, about my secret meetings with Patricia Chun, and I told him about my grandfather's trust, about the ironclad provisions that Richard and Amber knew nothing about. Will listened in stunned silence, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief, and finally, to a slow dawning, incredulous awe. He stared at me as I explained how I had deliberately played the role of the naive, defeated wife, lulling them into a false sense of security while I gathered my evidence and prepared my real response. You knew, he whispered when I had finished, his voice full of wonder. All this time, while I was feeling sorry for you, you knew what they were doing. I knew, I confirmed gently. And I let them think they'd won because sometimes the best strategy is to let your opponents reveal exactly who they are before you make your move. I needed them to be overconfident. I needed them to put their greed in writing, in a legally binding document. Will stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Not as his gentle, gardening-obsessed mother, but as a formidable force he never knew existed. Mom, I had no idea. I had no idea you were so strategic. I gave him a sad smile. 42 years of marriage teaches you a lot about people. Sweetheart. It teaches you about their strengths, their weaknesses, and their blind spots. And your father's greatest blind spot has always been his ego. So, what happens now? He asked, a new light in his eyes. The light of a fight. When Dad finds out about the trust. When they realize they've been played. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my gardening clothes. The sun was high in the sky. and the day suddenly felt full of possibility instead of dread. That, my dear, is up to them. They made their choices. Now, they get to live with the consequences. Will stood too. And for the first time since he'd arrived, he looked more like himself. Taller. Stronger. What about us? He asked. I mean, I know Amber was my wife, but I can't just pretend this didn't happen. I can't just let them get away with this. You don't have to pretend anything, I assured him, my voice firm. You are the innocent party in all of this, Will, and you have every right to protect yourself and to fight for your family. As if summoned by our conversation, another car pulled into the driveway. This time it was Claire's small, sensible hybrid. She got out, her face etched with anxiety as she hurried toward us, her eyes fixed on Will. Will, I'm so sorry, she said, her voice thick with emotion as she reached the steps. I'm so sorry. I know this is all my fault. If I hadn't told you to look. You saved me. Will interrupted, his voice firm and clear. He stepped toward her, closing the space between them. Claire, you saved me. If you hadn't warned me, I would have spent months, maybe years, married to someone who was using me, who despised me. You saved me from wasting my life on a lie. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but these were tears of relief. I should have said something sooner. I should have protected you better. I watched the two of them, a strange and powerful tableau on my front lawn. I noted the way Claire's genuine distress and her fierce loyalty to Will contrasted so sharply with her sister's calculated, self-serving manipulations. Where Amber was all sharp edges and hidden agendas, Claire radiated a warmth and sincerity that was heartbreakingly genuine. Even in her guilt and pain, her first thought was for Will's welfare. My son had married the wrong sister. Claire, I said gently, and she turned to look at me, her expression full of a surprising gratitude. You did exactly the right thing. You chose loyalty and honesty over a misplaced sense of family obligation. That takes real courage. I was so afraid, she confessed. I was so afraid you'd hate me for bringing all this ugliness into your family. I smiled. A real smile this time. My dear, you didn't bring anything into our family. You simply turned on the lights and revealed the rot that was already here, festering in the darkness. Now, we can finally deal with it. Will moved closer to Claire, his hand hovering near her shoulder as if he wanted to comfort her but wasn't sure if it was appropriate. The old boundaries of their relationship now blurred and uncertain. Claire, I need you to know how grateful I am, he said, his voice earnest. Not just for warning me, but for being honest when it would have been so much easier for you to stay silent. The look that passed between them was charged with something new and tentative. It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was the profound recognition of a shared wound, of a similar betrayal by someone they were supposed to be able to trust. It was the quiet acknowledgement of shared values, of a fundamental decency that Amber had so cruelly mocked, and that they both held sacred. In that moment, they were two survivors finding a life raft in the same storm. I should go, Claire said suddenly, pulling her gaze away from Will's and looking at me. She seemed to realize she was intruding on a family crisis, a witness to its raw, painful aftermath. You two need time to process all this. Actually, Will said quickly, a hint of his old self returning. Would you like to stay for dinner? Mom makes the best pot roast in the county, and to be honest, I think we could all use some normal conversation right now. I don't think I can bear to be alone. Claire looked to me for permission, her expression uncertain. I nodded warmly, a genuine sense of welcome filling me. I would love to have you stay, Claire. It's been far too long since we've had an honest conversation around our dinner table. As the three of us walked toward the house, I felt a palpable shift in the air around us. The toxic cloud of deceit and suspicion that had been hovering over our family for months was finally beginning to lift, replaced by the clean, sharp air of truth. Amber's betrayal had been devastating. A bomb detonated at the heart of our family. But its destructive blast had also revealed the true character of everyone involved. It had shown me that Will was stronger than I'd ever given him credit for, capable of facing hard truths and making difficult, painful decisions. It was proving Claire to be everything her sister wasn't: loyal, honest, and selfless. And it had forced me to rediscover my own strength, my ability to plan and wait and fight for what mattered most. That evening, as we sat around my familiar kitchen table, the same table where Amber had spun her web of lies just a few weeks prior, the atmosphere was entirely different. We shared stories, we laughed, and for the first time in a long time, the warmth in the room was real. We didn't talk about the divorce or the affair. We talked about books, about a funny movie Will had seen, about Claire's passion for landscape photography. We talked about anything and everything except the gaping wound that had brought us together. It was a tacit agreement to create a small pocket of normalcy in the midst of the chaos. I watched Will and Claire together. There was something profoundly healing in their connection. They were like two soldiers who had survived the same battle, able to understand each other's trauma without needing to speak of it. I saw how Will's eyes would soften when Claire spoke, how he listened to her with an attentiveness he had never shown anyone but Amber. And I saw how Claire, in turn, seemed to draw strength from his presence, her nervous energy calming, her smile becoming less fragile and more genuine as the evening wore on. They were beginning to see each other not as in-laws, but as people. You know, Claire said quietly as we cleared the dishes, her voice thoughtful. Amber always said I was too soft, too trusting. She used to tell me that nice people finish last. Will paused in his work, leaning against the counter and looking at her intently. I used to think being decent was enough, he admitted, his voice low. I thought if you treated people well and trusted them, they'd do the same for you. I believed in the good of people. And now? I asked, curious to see how this experience would shape my son's view of the world. Will glanced at Claire, a silent conversation passing between them, before he looked back at me. Now I think being decent is still the right choice. It's the only choice. But it doesn't mean you have to be naive. You can be kind and still protect yourself. You can trust people, but only the ones who prove they deserve it. His eyes flickered back to Claire, and the meaning was unmistakable. As the evening wound down and Claire prepared to leave, Will walked her to her car. Through the kitchen window, I watched them stand in the driveway under the soft glow of the porch light, their conversation intimate and earnest. He didn't touch her, but the space between them was filled with a quiet intensity. When he finally returned to the house, there was something different about his expression, a glimmer of light in the darkness of his eyes. She's a remarkable woman, he said simply, staring out the window at the departing taillights of Claire's car. Yes, she is, I agreed. Very different from her sister. Will nodded thoughtfully. I keep thinking about what you said earlier, about letting people reveal who they really are. Amber showed me exactly who she was for years, but I was too blind, too in love with the idea of her, to see it. But Claire, she's been showing me who she is all this time, too. Quietly, consistently. And I almost missed it because I was so focused on the wrong person. The heart heals, Will, I said softly. And when it does, it often sees more clearly than before. That night, as I prepared for bed in the house that would soon, legally and unequivocally, be mine again, I thought about the strange and painful turns life takes. Amber's treachery had been designed to tear our family apart, to isolate and conquer us. But in a strange twist of fate, it had actually forged a new, stronger alliance built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. In trying to destroy our family, Amber had inadvertently revealed its true strength. She had stripped away the pretenses and the false loyalties, leaving only what was real and worth preserving. The next morning, my newfound sense of purpose was put to the test. Will called me, his voice tight with a new kind of fury. Mom, you're not going to believe this. I was going through some of our old financial records, things Amber had in her desk. I found something. What is it, Will? It's a lockbox. I never knew the combination, but I broke it open. Inside, there are documents. Documents I think you need to see. Can Claire and I come over? An hour later, they were in my study. The contents of the lockbox spread across my antique desk. My blood ran cold as I looked at what they had found. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. The first document was a copy of my grandfather's will, which Amber must have obtained through some nefarious means. It was covered in her neat, precise handwriting, with notes in the margins about property values, potential legal challenges, and inheritance laws. She had been researching her heist for a very long time. The second was a meticulously detailed timeline. It showed when she planned to solidify her affair with Richard, when they would initiate divorce proceedings, and when they expected to take full possession of the house and its assets. It was a cold, calculated business plan for the destruction of my life. But it was the third document that made the air leave my lungs. It was a life insurance policy, a $1 million policy on my life, taken out by Amber 6 months ago, listing herself as the sole beneficiary. She forged your signature, Claire said, her voice a horrified whisper. I called the insurance company this morning, pretending to be her assistant. They confirmed the policy is active. They have no record of you ever agreeing to this. Will's face was pale with a terrifying, white-hot rage. She wasn't just planning to steal from you, Mom, he said, his voice shaking. She was planning to. He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The woman I had welcomed into my family, the woman I had treated like a daughter, had been planning not just my financial ruin, but potentially something far worse. The condescending comments, the concern about my health and well-being, the suggestions of a simpler life in a retirement community, all of it took on a sinister new meaning. There's more, Claire said, her hand trembling as she pulled out a printed email from the bottom of the stack. This is from a private investigator Amber hired. She was looking into your family's assets. She was trying to find loopholes in the trust. The investigator's report was thorough and chilling. It detailed not just the trust's provisions, but my daily routines, my appointments, my medical history, which she had clearly obtained illegally, my relationships with neighbors and friends. Amber hadn't just been planning a divorce. She had been studying me like a predator studies its prey, learning my habits, my vulnerabilities, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I looked at the documents, at the cold, hard proof of Amber's malevolence. The game had just become infinitely more dangerous. This was no longer just about a house and some money. This was about my life. Will, I said, my voice as steady as steel despite the turmoil churning in my chest. I need you to take these documents to the police. The forged insurance policy, the illegally obtained medical records. This is a felony. Already done, he replied, his jaw set. I called a friend of mine from college, Detective Martinez with the Greenwich Police. He's on his way to my house now to pick up the originals. He's opening an investigation into identity theft, insurance fraud, and conspiracy. We sat in silence for a moment, the three of us, absorbing the full, terrifying scope of Amber's betrayal. She hadn't just been unfaithful and greedy. She had been systematically planning to destroy our entire family, by any means necessary. It was then that Claire spoke again, her voice hesitant, as if she were wrestling with a terrible memory. There's something else, she said. Something I probably should have told you weeks ago. But I didn't want to believe it could be true. Will took her hand, his anger softening into concern. Go ahead, Claire. You can tell us. Claire took a deep, shuddering breath. Amber isn't just manipulative and greedy. I think she's dangerous. This might not be the first time she's done something like this. Her voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. Our Aunt Eleanor, my namesake. She died 2 years ago. A sudden heart attack. The doctors said it was very unexpected. Amber was. She was taking care of her at the time, helping with her medications, managing her finances. The horrifying implications hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. Will's grip on Claire's hand tightened. The doctors said it can happen to anyone. Claire continued, tears welling in her eyes. Aunt Eleanor had a heart condition, and sometimes these things just happen. But afterwards, Amber inherited Eleanor's house and all of her savings. And she seemed so pleased about it. Not grief-stricken like you'd expect. She seemed satisfied, like she'd closed a successful deal. Did you tell Detective Martinez about this? I asked, my mind racing, connecting the terrible dots. Claire nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. Yes. He said that, combined with the life insurance policy on you, it might be enough to warrant a formal inquiry into Aunt Eleanor's death. He said they might even be able to exhume the body. We were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up the driveway with unnecessary aggression, its engine revving before being cut off abruptly. Through the study window, I could see Richard's silver Mercedes, followed by a small, shabby-looking moving truck. The final act was about to begin, right on my front lawn. Amber emerged from the passenger seat of the Mercedes like a fury, her beautiful face twisted into a mask of rage. Her carefully constructed facade of the gentle, concerned daughter-in-law had finally cracked, revealing the calculating predator that had been lurking beneath all along. She slammed the car door with a force that echoed across the manicured lawn. Richard got out more slowly from the driver's side, looking less like a conquering hero and more like a man who had made a terrible miscalculation. His shoulders slumped in weary defeat. 2 burly movers in dusty overalls got out of the truck, looking uncertainly from the grand house to the screaming woman. That's my cue to go inside, I said, standing up from my desk. The documents, the proof of Amber's malevolence, lay scattered across the polished wood. For a moment, I felt a primal urge to go out there myself, to confront her, to unleash the torrent of fury I had kept dammed up for weeks. But I resisted. My role in this drama was nearly over. This was Will's battle to fight now. It had to be. Will, would you and Claire mind handling this? I don't think I can look at either of them right now without saying something I might regret. Will nodded, his face a grim, determined mask. It would be my pleasure, Mom. He stood, and in that moment, he looked taller than I had ever seen him. The boy was gone, replaced by a man ready to defend his home and his family. Claire stood beside him, her fear replaced by a quiet, resolute strength. They were a united front. I retreated to my living room, positioning myself near the front window where I could watch the confrontation unfold on my front lawn, an unseen observer at my own play. Amber was screaming at Will, her voice shrill and ugly, a stark violation of the peaceful afternoon air. What is the meaning of this? Will, why are my things in boxes on the curb? I told you I was coming to get the rest of my belongings. Your belongings are in the boxes, Amber. Will's voice carried through the glass, calm and implacable, a rock against which her fury crashed. You're not welcome in this house anymore. And you are not welcome here. He gestured to my house, the house she had already claimed in her mind. This is my house, Amber shrieked, her voice cracking with disbelief and rage. She pointed a trembling finger at the front door. Richard's house. We signed the papers. It's ours. No, Claire said, stepping forward to stand beside Will, her voice clear and steady. It never was. And it never will be. The look Amber gave her sister was pure venom. It was a look of such concentrated hatred that I flinched. Even from behind the safety of the window. You, she hissed. You did this. You snake. You poisoned them against me. You've always been jealous. Jealous because I found a way out of our pathetic family, and you're still stuck being nobody. I'd rather be nobody than be you. Claire replied quietly, the simple words carrying more weight than all of Amber's hysterical screaming. The words struck a nerve. Amber lunged forward as if to attack her sister. Her hands curled into claws. But Will stepped between them instantly. Solid. Immovable barrier. He didn't touch her. But his presence, his sheer size and the cold fury in his eyes, was enough to stop her advance. For a moment, the four of them formed a tableau on the sun-dappled lawn. Will and Claire, united in their quiet strength and integrity. Amber, isolated in her rage and desperation, her plans unraveling around her. And Richard, standing beside the moving truck. Pathetic, defeated figure who seemed to have aged 10 years in the past hour. He looked from his son to his mistress, the architect of his ruin, and seemed to finally grasp the full magnitude of his folly. Get off my mother's property, Will said. His voice carrying an authority I had never heard from him before. It was the voice of the man of the house, the rightful heir. Both of you. You have 5 minutes to get in your cars and leave. Or I'm calling the police. Richard finally spoke, his voice tired and broken. Come on, Amber. It's over. Let's just go. But Amber wasn't ready to accept defeat. Her ambition was a rabid animal, and it wouldn't be put down so easily. She spun away from Will and Claire, her wild eyes scanning the front of the house until they locked with mine through the living room window. A jolt went through me as her hateful gaze found me. This isn't over, she screamed, her voice directed at me now. You think you're so smart, you old witch. But I know things about this family. I know secrets that could destroy all of you. This was my moment. My final line in the play. I slid the window open just a few inches. Enough for my voice to carry clearly across the manicured yard. I didn't shout. I spoke in the same calm, conversational tone I used when discussing flower arrangements with the garden club. The only secrets being destroyed today are yours, dear, I said. And then, the final blow. Detective Martinez is very interested in your relationship with your aunt, with Eleanor Hayes. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The color drained from Amber's face so quickly I thought she might faint right there on the lawn. Her mouth open, but no sound came out. The threat of public humiliation she could handle. The loss of a fortune was infuriating. But the cold, hard reality of a murder investigation, of an exhumation, of a prison sentence that was a terror she could not fight. She had been outplayed on every level. Richard saw the look on her face, the pure, unadulterated fear. And whatever fight was left in him evaporated. He grabbed her arm, his grip hard and urgent, pulling her toward his Mercedes. We're leaving, he called out, his voice hoarse. We're leaving right now. He practically threw her into the passenger seat and then hurried to the driver's side, not even bothering to speak to the bewildered movers, who were now leaning against their truck, watching the drama unfold with open mouths. He got in the car, and the Mercedes sped down the driveway, spitting gravel in its wake. The little moving truck, its purpose now obsolete, hesitated for a moment before starting its engine and rumbling away, following its disgraced employers into oblivion. Silence descended upon the lawn, broken only by the sound of a bird singing in the old oak tree. The strangers who had invaded my home, who had planned to steal my legacy and possibly my life, were finally gone. I felt something release in my chest, a tension I hadn't even realized I was holding. It was the feeling of a battle won. Will and Claire came inside, both looking emotionally drained but victorious. Will collapsed into my favorite armchair, the one his father used to sit in, and ran a hand through his messy hair. "It's over," he said, his voice a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. "They're really gone." "The part concerning the house is over," I corrected gently, walking over to him and placing a hand on his shoulder. "But Amber still needs to face the consequences for what she's done. The forgery, the fraud, and possibly for what she did to her aunt. Justice moves slowly, but it moves." Claire curled up on the couch, looking younger and more vulnerable than her 30 years. "I keep thinking I should feel sorry for her," she said, her voice small. "She's my sister. After all, my only sister. But I can't. I just feel empty." She chose this path, step by step, decision by decision. "You don't owe her your sympathy, Claire," I assured her, my voice soft but firm. "She threw away your love and loyalty just as easily as she threw away Will's. She made her choices. Now she gets to live with them. Or, more accurately, she gets to face them." As evening began to fall, the three of us prepared a simple dinner together in my kitchen. It felt like a celebration, a quiet reclaiming of the heart of my home. Though none of us said so explicitly, we were celebrating survival. We were celebrating integrity. And we were celebrating the strange, unexpected bonds that had been forged in the fire of betrayal. Looking at Will and Claire working side by side at the counter, chopping vegetables and talking in low, comfortable tones, I could see something beautiful and resilient growing between them. It wasn't the desperate, grasping passion that Amber had faked or the toxic codependence she had shared with Richard. This was something real and quiet and lasting, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values. It was a foundation of rock, not sand. "You know," I said as we sat down to eat at the kitchen table, the room filled with the comforting aroma of roasting chicken. "This house has seen a lot of history. My grandmother raised 5 children here during the Great Depression. My mother survived the long years of the Second World War within these walls, waiting for my father to come home. I raised Will here. And someday," I said, looking from my son to the wonderful woman beside him, "I hope his children will play in that same backyard." Will and Claire exchanged a look so full of unspoken promise and future possibility that it brought tears to my eyes. "But tonight," I continued, raising my glass of wine in a toast, "we celebrate a much simpler fact. We celebrate the fact that this house will remain in the hands of people who understand what family really means." As we toasted to new beginnings, I felt the deep, profound satisfaction of a battle well fought and decisively won. Amber and Richard had tried to destroy everything I held dear. But in the end, they had only succeeded in revealing what was truly precious, what was truly unbreakable. They had lost everything, while we, in the midst of our pain, had found everything that mattered. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen preparing Thanksgiving dinner. The air, which for so long had felt heavy with unspoken tensions and deceit, was now filled with the warm, comforting aromas of roasting turkey, sage, and cinnamon. The room itself felt different, brighter, lighter. It was the same kitchen where I had entertained Amber's false sympathy and endured her calculated manipulations, but today it was filled with the sound of genuine laughter and easy, loving conversation. The ghosts had been exorcised. Will was at the stove, carefully basting the turkey with the same intense concentration he'd shown as a child learning to tie his shoes. He wore an apron over his sweater, his sleeves rolled up, and he looked happier and more at peace than I had seen him in years. The hollowed-out look of betrayal had been replaced by a quiet confidence that suited him. Claire sat at the kitchen island, her engagement ring catching the afternoon light as she expertly chopped celery and onions for the stuffing. The diamond was modest but elegant, a perfect reflection of the woman wearing it. Will had proposed a month ago, in the rose garden right outside the window, and seeing them together still filled my heart with a quiet, profound joy. They had found their way to each other not through a whirlwind romance, but through the slow, steady process of healing each other's wounds and discovering a shared soul. "Mom, the timer for the sweet potatoes is going off," Will called out, not looking up from his critical task of ensuring a perfectly brown turkey skin. "I've got it," Claire said, sliding off her stool with the practiced ease of someone who now knew her way around my kitchen as well as I did. Over the past few months, she had become an integral part of our household rhythm, a gentle, steady presence that had helped make this house a home again. She wasn't replacing anyone. She was helping us build something new. The front doorbell chimed its familiar tune. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to answer it, expecting our neighbors, the Hendersons, kind, elderly couple whom I'd invited to join us. I was tired of holidays defined by obligation and pretense. This year, I wanted to be surrounded by people who represented genuine friendship and simple decency. Instead, I found Detective Martinez standing on my porch. His expression was serious, as it always was, but the grim tension I'd seen in his face during our previous meetings was gone. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, giving me a small, respectful nod. "I hope I'm not interrupting your holiday." "Not at all. Detective. Please, come in." I held the door open wider. "The house smells wonderful. Can I offer you some coffee? We have plenty of food if you'd like to stay for dinner." He followed me into the living room, his large frame seeming to fill the space. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't stay," he said, declining my offer of refreshment with a polite smile. "I just wanted to update you and your son on the investigation before the long holiday weekend. I thought you'd want to know." Will and Claire appeared in the doorway, their faces tensing with anticipation. They wiped their hands on their aprons, a mirror image of domesticity, and came to stand beside me. "Amber Hayes has been formally charged," Martinez began, his voice factual and direct. "Insurance fraud, 3 counts of identity theft, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. The district attorney feels very confident about securing convictions on all counts." Her legal team tried to argue diminished capacity, but her own meticulous planning, the emails to the private investigator, the timeline, it all pointed to a clear and premeditated intent. She built her own cage. A wave of relief washed over me, but the question that truly mattered still hung in the air. And Eleanor?" Claire asked quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "My aunt?" Martinez's expression grew more serious. He looked directly at Claire, his gaze softening with a hint of compassion. "The medical examiner's report from the exhumation was conclusive. They found traces of digitalis in your aunt's system, levels that were not consistent with her prescription, but were consistent with intentional, repeated poisoning over a period of several weeks." Claire's hand flew to her mouth, and a soft gasp escaped her lips. Will instinctively put his arm around her, pulling her close. So it was true. The darkest suspicion had been confirmed. She killed her. "We're building a case for first-degree murder," Martinez confirmed. "We were able to lift Amber's fingerprints from the secondary medication bottles in the back of your aunt's medicine cabinet, the one she clearly thought no one would ever look for. And our cybercrimes unit discovered she had been researching the lethal effects of digitalis online for weeks before Ms. Hayes's death, using a public library computer she thought was untraceable. She was arrogant. She thought she was smarter than everyone else, and that's what ultimately tripped her up." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool November air. Amber's greed hadn't just been opportunistic. It had been monstrous. "What about Richard?" Will asked, his voice tight. "My father?" Martinez's gaze shifted to Will. "There's no evidence to suggest he had any involvement in, or knowledge of, what happened to Eleanor Hayes. But he has been charged as an accessory to the fraud schemes. given his full cooperation with the investigation once the extent of Ms. Hayes's crimes became clear. The D.A. has offered him a plea deal. He'll likely serve some time, but it will be a significantly reduced sentence. Richard. He had called me once, a few weeks after the confrontation on the lawn. His voice had been hollow, a ghost of the confident, booming man I had married. He had tried to apologize, stumbling over words of regret, but his sorrow seemed to be mostly for himself, for the life he had so foolishly thrown away. I had listened politely and then told him I wished him peace, but that I had nothing more to say. Our 42 years together had been reduced to a 5-minute phone call. After Detective Martinez left, we stood together in the living room for a long moment, absorbing the news. Justice was finally being served. The legal system was grinding forward, as it should, but the finality of it felt strangely hollow. Eleanor Hayes was still dead. Will's first marriage was still a ruin of lies. And 42 years of my life had still been built on a foundation that had crumbled the moment my husband chose vanity and betrayal over loyalty and love. "Are you okay, Mom?" Will asked gently, his arms still around Claire, his eyes full of concern for me. I considered the question carefully, searching for the honest answer within myself. "I'm relieved," I said finally. "I'm relieved that Amber can't hurt anyone else. I'm relieved that Eleanor will finally get justice. But mostly," I said, looking at the two of them, the new, strong family unit they were forming, "I'm relieved that we survived this with our integrity and our love for each other intact." Claire reached out and squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I keep thinking about all the what-ifs," she confessed. "What if I hadn't found the courage to tell you about the affair? What if you hadn't known about the trust? What if Amber had succeeded?" "But she didn't," Will pointed out, his voice firm. "And we're all stronger now because of what we went through. We know what truly matters." He was right. The past year had tested us in ways I could never have imagined. It had stripped away every illusion, every pretense. But we had emerged from the wreckage more connected, more honest with each other, and more profoundly aware of what was truly worth fighting for. The Hendersons arrived shortly after, their cheerful greetings breaking the somber mood. They were followed by Patricia Chan and her husband, kind, quiet man who, I discovered, shared my passion for cultivating heirloom tomatoes. I had invited them as a gesture of gratitude that went beyond a simple legal fee. Patricia hadn't just been my lawyer. She had been my strategist, my confidant, and my staunchest ally. The dining room, which had once felt so large and empty, was now filled with the warm buzz of conversation and easy laughter. It was the kind of genuine warmth that can't be manufactured or manipulated. As we all sat down to dinner, I looked around the table at the faces gathered there. Real friends, chosen family, people who cared about each other without agenda or calculation. This was what Amber, in her cold, transactional view of the world, had never understood. That true wealth isn't measured in property values or bank accounts, but in the quality of the relationships you build, the loyalty you earn, and the love you give. Before we began to eat, I stood and raised my wine glass. The conversation quieted, and all eyes turned to me. "I'd like to say something," I began, my voice clear and steady. "This past year has been, without a doubt, one of the most difficult of my life. I lost a marriage I thought would last forever. I discovered that people I loved were capable of unimaginable betrayal. I learned that my family, and my very home, was under attack from within." I paused, meeting each pair of eyes around the table. But I also learned some incredible things. I learned that I am stronger than I ever imagined. I learned that my son is a man of profound integrity and compassion, a man who chooses love over revenge. I smiled at Will, who looked back at me, his eyes full of love. I learned that sometimes, The greatest gifts come disguised as the most painful losses. I looked directly at Claire. This wonderful woman who had the courage to speak the truth when silence would have been so much easier. And I learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who stand by you when the world is trying to tear you down. The people who choose honesty over convenience. And loyalty over self-interest. Will stood and raised his own glass. To Mom, he said, his voice thick with emotion, who taught us that grace under pressure isn't just a saying, it's a way of life. To Eleanor, Patricia added, her husband beaming beside her, who proved that patience, intelligence, and a well-drafted trust can overcome any adversary. To New Beginnings, Claire said softly, her eyes shining as she looked from me to Will. And to the families we choose, just as much as the families we're born into. As our glasses clinked together, a chorus of celebration and hope, I felt a deep sense of completion. Not because the story was over, I knew it wasn't. Will and Claire would marry in the spring. There would be grandchildren. Eventually. Life, with all its joys and challenges, would continue. But I felt complete because I finally understood who I was. Beyond being Richard's wife or Will's mother, I was Eleanor Morrison, keeper of my family's legacy, protector of what mattered, survivor of betrayal, an architect of my own future. After dinner, as our guests began to depart, their warm goodbyes and wishes for a happy Thanksgiving echoing in the hallway, Patricia pulled me aside near the grand staircase. Have you given any more thought to what you'll do with the downtown condo? She asked, her tone shifting from friendly guest to sharp legal advisor. The one from the divorce settlement? The title officially cleared last week. It's all yours. I smiled. A genuine, unburdened smile. The condo. The sterile, two-bedroom apartment that Richard and Amber had so magnanimously bestowed upon me. Their consolation prize for the loss of my entire life. It had been meant as an insult. A symbol of my diminished status. But in my mind, it had transformed into something else entirely. I said. I'm thinking of turning it into a refuge. A safe place for women who are rebuilding their lives after difficult divorces. Nothing grand or institutional. Just a quiet, beautiful place where someone can stay for a few months, free of charge, while they figure out their next chapter. I envisioned a space filled with light, comfortable furniture, and shelves full of books, a sanctuary for healing. Patricia nodded, her eyes lighting up with approval. Eleanor, that's a brilliant idea. Amber and Richard probably thought they were taking something valuable from you with that settlement. They had no idea they were giving you the seed capital to help other women who have been in your exact position. Ironic, isn't it? I said, a sense of deep satisfaction washing over me. Her greed became the foundation for something genuinely useful. I'll call it the Sage House. I added, thinking of Claire's quiet bravery. A place for wisdom and new beginnings. Later that evening, after Will and Claire had gone home to their own apartment, their loving goodbyes still warming the air, I walked through the quiet house, turning off lights and checking locks. It was the same ritual I had performed for over 40 years. A mindless routine that had once marked the end of another lonely day. But now, it felt different. It felt peaceful rather than routine. An act of stewardship rather than habit. The house was safe. My family was safe. I was safe. In my bedroom, I opened the antique cherrywood jewelry box on my dresser, the one my mother had given me. I sifted through the pieces that marked the milestones of my life. The pearl necklace from my 21st birthday. The delicate sapphire earrings Richard had given me for our 25th anniversary, a gift that now felt hollow. The simple gold bracelet from my grandmother. My fingers brushed past them all until they found what I was looking for. Tucked away in a velvet pouch at the bottom. My original wedding ring. The simple, unadorned gold band Richard had placed on my finger when we were both young and impossibly full of dreams. I held it up to the soft glow of the lamplight, studying the inscription inside. its letters worn smooth with time. Forever and always are. Forever had lasted 42 years. Always had ended the day he chose another woman over his family. But holding the ring now, I felt no anger, no bitterness. The sharp edges of my grief had been worn down into a smooth, sad acceptance. That chapter of my life was closed. The love had been real. For a time. Even if it hadn't been permanent. Its ending didn't erase the good years. The shared laughter. The beautiful son we had raised together. It had simply run its course. Ending in a way I could never have foreseen. With a quiet sense of ceremony, I placed the ring back in its velvet pouch and closed the lid of the jewelry box. The past was finally where it belonged. My phone buzzed on the nightstand with a text message. It was from Will. Thank you for an amazing Thanksgiving. Mom. Claire and I are so grateful to have you in our lives. Love you. I smiled and typed back, my fingers moving quickly over the screen. Thank you for becoming the man I always knew you could be. Sleep well. My dear. I love you both. A second message appeared almost instantly. This one was from Claire. I never had a mother who believed in me the way you do. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. I wiped away the single tear that sprang to my eye. A tear not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. At 64 years old, I was discovering that some of life's greatest and most unexpected gifts come in the second act. They arrive when you finally understand what you are worth and refuse to accept anything less. The old house settled around me with its familiar creaks and sighs, the comfortable sounds of a structure that had weathered many storms and would, I knew, weather many more. I thought about my grandmother, who had faced the Great Depression with a fierce and unyielding spirit within these walls. I thought about my mother, who had maintained this house as a sanctuary during World War II. Her courage a quiet, constant flame. I was part of a long, unbroken line of strong women who had protected what mattered, who had faced adversity with grace and determination. Ember had tried to break that chain, but she had only succeeded in forging it stronger, tempering it in the fire of her own making. Tomorrow, I would call Patricia and begin the paperwork to establish the foundation for the Sage House. The condo that was supposed to be my consolation prize would become my passion project. Next month, I would help Will and Claire plan their spring wedding, which they had decided to hold in the garden, right beside the ancient oak tree where my own grandparents had married 80 years ago. The roots of my family ran deep in this soil. But tonight, I would simply be grateful. Grateful for survival. Grateful for discovery. Grateful for the profound and humbling knowledge that at any age, at any stage of life, it is never too late to discover who you really are when everything false is stripped away. Outside my window, the bare branches of the oak tree we had planted on our 10th anniversary swayed in the November wind. It had weathered storms, droughts, and countless seasons of change. Like me, it had been forced to bend, but it had not broken. It had endured. It had grown stronger. In the spring, its leaves would return, green and full of life. And so would I. Now, I'm curious about you who have listened to my story. What would you have done if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar, where you had to find a strength you didn't know you possessed? Comment below and let me know. Thank you for watching until here.